and welcome back to Internet of Senses podcast. Normally, I'll talk about sight, and today we're actually talking multisensory. So that's really fun for me in particular. I actually have worked with multiple companies on different kinds of senses and touch and hearing, and then I've met with different companies over the years that are do all different kinds of senses and even teach about sensory tech in one of my classes. And when I heard about Marianna and started learning all the different things that she did, I got very excited. And this podcast might be a little bit shorter because I kept on talking prior to the recording about all my excitement, around her work and about the different stuff that she does. So I'm thrilled to have her here. She's a research pioneer in the integration of touch, taste, and smell in human and computer interaction, professor of multisensory interfaces at University College London, the CSO and co-founder of Hynt, but that is literally just the beginning. She's written over 100 publications in top journals and conferences. And when I started listening to the different interviews and different stuff that she had to say, I just felt like I was literally at the beginning of diving into her work. So I am so excited to have you here. And I don't know where to even start, but thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Samantha, for having me. It's really exciting to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, me too. As I said, I'm gonna start a little bit with almost that origin story. And how did you get interested in senses in general and decide to like study them broadly?
It's a really interesting question because I'm getting asked a lot, and I don't know the moment, but I guess I go always back where I grew up. So I grew up in a village in the Dolomites in North Italy, and we had this little goat farm. So I grew up literally in the middle of nature, where you can imagine a lot of different smells and tastes and tactile sensations as well, and obviously sight and sounds. So I don't know if that formed me or not, but when I went studying at the University of Salzburg in Austria, there was not the particular focus on the senses. I mean, I ended up going to learn about human computer interfaces and HCI, human computer interaction. Um, I was working a lot on audiovisual projects. So, like, how do we design better mobile phones for elderly? How do we create new games for children where we use facial expressions? Or how do we improve workers or interactions with automation in factories or autonomous driving? So there was a huge range of projects I was involved. And I think when I was teaching Introduction to Human Computer Interaction in the computer science department in Salzburg, I always try to tell them, think about what we humans bring into this relationship with technology. We are not just eyes and ears, we have hands, our whole body is a tactile surface, but also our nose and our tongue. And you can imagine students in a computer science department look at you like, well, why
That's
would you
the
want to use your tongue?
immediate studies that happens as well when I start bringing up all the senses. And I talk to them, I say, they're like inputs. And they're like, what are you talking about? And it was like, these are inputs into your brain. And they're like, I'm like, by the end of they're like very confused, like they're living in a different world.
Yeah, but I guess I was most likely in the opening, I was always saying that because I mean, the humans bring much more capabilities into this relationship with technology, and we building new interactive systems, we make very little use of those capabilities. I think only when I then moved from Austria to the UK with a 2 year Marie Curie fellowship, which gave me the space and freedom to think, what do I want to do with my future? How do I want to shape this field? I think that's when I started exploring more than audiovisual modalities. And that's when I did my first olfactory studies, my first studies around taste and also touch, with the particular focus on ultrasound-based stimulation, is touchless stimulation. And they became the kind of like groundwork of the research vision, which I then formulated. And I was lucky enough to get like a fellowship in the following 5 years where I built up my research lab and my team. And I think that has been now the story for, yes, the last decade. Really, really diving into touch, taste, and smell as the modalities I want to promote, advocate, and understand for human-computer interaction.
Yeah, no, I love it. In prepping for this, I was like, when did I get? Because I know that I love multisensory, and mine was, I think, seeing the sensory homunculus man in grade school and being frightened. I'm like, what is this? And then, like, with the hands and the tongue and and it was like, ah, and they're like, that's how your brain understands this. And I just remember being like, that's not how we work. But I think once I started trying, VR initially, right, is very, very like your eyes and your ears. And then I tried like really good haptics from this company, like haptics, and they were like sub-millimeter. And I was like, I can touch things. It was like, I forgot there's that sense too. And then really good spatial audio, even with like, oh, wait, that can change things. And then really good smell techno. Oh, wait. And I even came up with this random idea for a taste technology and then ended up going to CES, I think it was last year, the year before, and then there was the same thing and met the professor from Japan who created the taste thing. And it was so I just am always kind of like, wow, this is kind of this world that's not quite explored, and the interconnections between them is not quite explored, which I feel like you do so uniquely. Everybody else seems a little bit siloed by one or two, and you seem to be able to understand how they all work together. Do you end up picking which sense, or do you pick two senses, or what drives you to decide sort of which kind of projects you work on?
I wouldn't say that I fully understand how they all map together. I think that would be the end of my career, I guess.
How about more than most people?
I
I'll give you
think
that.
every time I combine or have a project, I think we get so much insights and we find out things which really give us so many more questions we want to study. But to really come back how it starts, right? I think I always wanted to go for each modality. So the way I started is I wanted to understand touch, taste, and smell in their own right, and how can we, from a HCI point of view, from how we build new systems, how can we understand them so we can really kind of like build better interactions and experiences. So I always wanted to study them individually. And that's why I always started building the kind of like framework or the vocabulary, which, especially when it comes to the chemical senses, is missing. How do you describe smells and taste? Not just staying with, oh, I like it, or oh, that's sweet. Now there is much more subtlety and more to it than those kind of higher level descriptions. So, how do we capture them? And so I try to really dive into that. And then obviously, when you go to those underexplored modalities, you soon realize this place, the devices existing are not quite as sophisticated as you wish them to be, or they are to the extent that they are like gustatometers, olfactometers, which are big lab experimentation instruments, but they are not what we really like to have in order to create real world applications. So we spend a lot of time building those kind of like ecosystem and tools and devices to stimulate our nose, our taste. There's still much more to be done there. And as we did that, obviously you think about, well, or people ask why? Why are you doing it? So you need to think about the applications, the added values. And so we did a lot of different demonstrations to demonstrate that the different sensory modalities have an added value. And that's where you start integrating like smell with sounds and touch and visuals, obviously. And those kind of projects are very much driven by the team because I get students. One student is interested in in-car interaction, so we do automotive. Another student is interested in gaming, entertainment. We do that. Another wants to create new ways of science communication. So we focus on that. And then sometimes we get approached for virtual reality, extended reality applications, or as in the last almost more than 5 years, health and well-being applications. So how can you kind of like think of those? So it's very much shaped by the team and the collaborators, but the fundamental questions, how and what kind of multisensory experiences we can design for, always remains the same. So I always want to kind of build those fundamental understanding, but then we demonstrate the applications in different use cases.
So I think, I mean, one thing I found is, and you were saying this, is like this idea that people are aware of certain senses and then maybe not aware of other senses. Why do you think that is? And then how do you get somebody to understand, like, wait a second, this particular sense is super valuable in these, eventually in these applications?
Yeah, it's very much we take it for granted, right? Because it's just there. And I think, especially when you think about smell and taste, well, yes, when we eat something nice, we might really kind of get that enjoyment and that kind of like starts to kind of like really make us feel happy. But otherwise, we just eat and that's what it is. So it's kind of automatic because our brain is also smart enough to just switch it off because we constantly sense sensory information. So if we would constantly process it, then it would be a complete sensory overload. So we selectively decide when to pay attention or not. Either it's because of danger or it's because of particular attraction or whatever. But it's very, very interesting to see how our sensory information processing system is working and how it allows us to go through the world. Because if you would constantly sense the chair and the texture of the chair you're sitting on or the clothes you're wearing, it would drive you mad, most likely. So in a way, the pandemic we have seen, like now 5 years ago, has shown us, especially when it comes to the chemical senses, that suddenly losing your sense of smell and then also being affecting your sense of taste, that you realize how important those senses are for your quality of life. Suddenly food becomes bland or we can't smell each other because there is a natural kind of chemical signaling between humans, but also I can't smell myself. We all have a certain scent to ourselves, be it our perfume or odor or body odor, good or bad, no judgment, but is we identify us through those kind of sensory signals to ourselves and others. And I think that is really kind of like where I thought, okay, it's so important for our everyday life. But at the same time, before the pandemic, I started working with the UK charity Smell Taste, or formerly known as Fifth Sense, where I met people who have no sense of smell, lost their sense of smell, and the impact they describe, like basically living behind a glass wall, and the impact that has on their social interactions, but also their mental health, really made me think, well, we are developing this specific technology. So can we actually help those people find ways to regain their sense of smell if it's just a temporary loss? Or can we find sensory substitutions, right? I mean, that's the other interesting thing. If you study the senses individually, then you find certain kind of building blocks in one sensory modality, and you might find the connection to another sensory modality. And then there are those links with cross-model interactions, which have been studied a lot in experimental psychologists, and we're drawing on those kind
Was
of
that
rich
that's like
research.
when people where it kind of crosses you can smell I don't know, a color or something like that. Is that same kind
That
of framework?
that is kind of the synesthesia, where it kind of naturally occurs that you might think of Monday and you see the color red. There are synesthetes. It's a very small number of the population who have this automatic kind of associations across modalities. But on the other hand, there is the field of cross-modal correspondences, where especially Professor Charles Spence from University of Oxford is very kind of like driving this field, where you can see that, for example, a spiky shape is associated with something sour. So, or a rounded shape might be associated with sweetness, or the red color is more associated with sweetness versus maybe green more with sour. So it goes back to this original Kiki Bauba
I mean,
paradigm.
the Billie Eilish, the singer, and there's a few other like they have that kind of thing and will describe how they want a sound to look a certain way or be a certain it's just super fascinating. So there is, I guess, movement within. It's not so individualized what happens with each sense, and you're not aware of it necessarily, right?
Exactly. Those kind of correspondences, they exist and they might be kind of like based on learned associations because that's just like how they are, or we have natural kind of associations with or reactions to certain kind of like sensory elements. But it's those kind of like correspondences which makes it so interesting to then understand if there is opportunities for creating sensory substitutions. Because if you cannot see, for example. So, what would be the kind of other modality representation? Would it be through a sound, where we see a lot with blind and visually impaired individuals, or tactile stimulations, where you try to find what are the corresponding sensory elements between those modalities? Or when you can't smell, could it be again a sound or a tactile sensation that gives you that kind of crunchiness or the sharpness that we otherwise are missing when we are tasting something or when we are smelling something?
Right. I mean, because some of it is that it's just to experience it. There's a friend of mine who actually worked in VR for a long time and during that period of time did lose his smell. And he's just I sent him a link to the thing that you're involved in because I was like, look,
The smell
there's
care
somebody
project.
who's somebody it's like a person in technology is trying to figure this out. I think what is like counter to that I also think is kind of amazing is that if you understand, and I think you tapped into some of the interviews you're doing as articles of this idea of being mindful too on the flip is like bring you into your senses. And so that you pay attention to all of this. And so there's the overwhelm if you always are paying attention, but also needing to be present with it as like I find that kind of distinction hard to hard to balance in my mind, but I guess that's sort of how you have to probably think about that too, that if you're talking about if you're building something for smell or building something, whatever, it's like how much is too much and how much keeps you present. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah, it's like so because the human brain is very smart in sense of like ignoring sensory signals which are not really important right now, but that also means we try to reduce the cognitive load so that we can focus on activities we are doing, and that means certain stimuli just become taken for granted, and that's often happening with the kind of like sensory experiences. But that also means like let's take the example of eating. People start just eating very fast because I'm stressed, I need to finish something, I need to go to the train, whatever. So it's like we don't even pay attention. So is there a way we can actually slow down some of those activities? Because there is actually a huge pleasure in just trying to differentiate some of the textures, some of the flavors that are emerging, or some of the tactile experiences. They have hedonic qualities we otherwise miss. And I think if we could try to develop new ways and new interactions, or even just new ways of stimulation to bring back some of this mindfulness, it would be beneficial for our own well-being and the quality of life. But obviously there is lots of kind of steps still to be done to achieve that, because the technology you see these days from taste or smell stimulations, and we try to improve them, they are still not as nicely embedded in the environment as like screens and soundscapes. So it's like till we have that, they are best studied in a virtual environment. That's where we do a lot of studies around taste and flavor experiences, because you can hide basically the stimulation devices outside, and you bring people in a virtual environment where you can make them focus on certain activities like the eating of something, and then study the effects of the different sensor elements. So there's still a lot to be done, but like having that vision that you can actually build these multisensory interfaces and they are integrated in your everyday life in a more seamless way, then you can try to bring wherever meaningful this attention to those sensory elements through amplifying, enhancing, or even reducing certain aspects. And I think that is super exciting, because I think with all the challenges of a very fast-paced life many people are living, or as we get older, maybe it's too slow and too less socially engaging. So there are so many different stages in our life where I think we could do good if we meaningfully integrate it. And I'm not saying technology is the solution for everything. I think human-human interaction and communication is still important, but we as human already bring that sensory information system into that human-human relationship. But we know technology becomes more and more part of it. So those technologies need to take some of that capabilities into consideration as well, to be properly enhancing our lives and not just like disrupting us.
Yeah, no, I want to we'll get to that too, because I always tend to do like what are the opportunities and then like what are the maybe the issues that need to be
Oh,
made.
sorry,
I
did
feel
I
like
run a
you do
bad?
both, which is again like another reason why I just became super fascinated as I read about your work. So if we can talk a little bit about the different kinds of applications, because I feel like in looking at your work on smell, you did like a training program with actual, measurable steps, and I feel like I found that, super fascinating because it isn't something that people think of right away. If you could sort of touch on that.
Yes, so that kind of like really smell has occupied a lot of my team's time over the last many years. We really have worked a lot on digital scent technologies, and initially not with a particular focus on creating like an application for healthcare, because the initial attraction was in the immersive experience space. But then more and more it became clear that there is opportunities to create something which we know in the healthcare, especially for eye testing and hearing tests, we have established kind of tests. But when it comes to our nose, we do not really have a smell test, a digitally controlled smell test where you can determine how well do you really smell. Well, there are people who say, I have a terrible smell or I have a good sense of smell, but how do we know?
Or sommelier, you're like, of course you're smelling all the notes or whatever. And I thought that's an amazing just application of just like how well and establish a baseline. And so keep going.
Yeah, no, but you're absolutely right. And I mean, if you're a sommelier or a nose, I mean, we shouldn't forget that they use their nose every single day, very actively and mindfully. As I'm sure you're working in visual design with the eyes, you can discriminate different shades of red. I'm like, okay, this is red, this is blue. It's like, so like, I don't know, no, this is like a darker red.
There's a whole
So
game that I will send you the link to that about like all the gradations because the designers know all of them. And I'm like darker or lighter is
exactly.
a
So
little more orange.
we have that kind of language, and obviously again there is a graphic designers, visual designers, they get trained. We have master's programs, we have undergrad programs, but there are not like smell designers, olfactory designers or experience designers with smell. So it's like we were still lacking that. So And to come to the point, so we then kind of like discovered that our digital scent technology is actually quite useful in health and well-being. And so we started working with the charities, Smell Taste, but also ENT experts, where they were working with people who lost their sense of smell and taste. And there are different underlying causes there why you lose your sense of smell, from head injury to viral infections, whatever. And they all kind of have different implications and consequences on your life, because if you might have a head injury, you might not be able to kind of generate your connections from your nose to your brain, and through kind of stimulating it. Like when you're breaking a leg, you can do physiotherapy, right? So you do physiotherapy and then you start walking again. And the same, what we developed is a physiotherapy for your nose, or nose gym as we call it. And for certain kind of underlying causes, when you lose your sense of smell, it might be effective, but for others, it might not be. If it's a viral infection, most likely it can be very useful, because it's not that you cut your connections, but you just like have a temporary impairment of the connections from the molecules that go into your nose and then activate the areas in your brain. So what we then introduced is we used our technology, which is basically a digitally controlled device which can release scent. So you have your mobile device, you open the app, you connect the app with your device through Bluetooth, you select the training program, you start the session, and then it starts releasing the scent. And then you can respond, first of all, well, can you smell it or not? How intense you smell it, and so on. So it's a short kind of protocol, and you go through those kind of like 6 scents in a randomized order, you repeat them, and then you have your record, which is less than 5 minutes. You record it and you do it twice a day, ideally. It's like you do your little walk in the morning and the evening, and you do it over 6 months.
That's the like
So
the eye test, the eye training. If people have like their eye wanders a little bit, they have to do something like that too.
exactly. It's like I think we often just think of it like from our physical perspective, like when we have problems with walking or backs and so on. So we do a little exercise, but our eyes, our other modalities, I mean, even our fingers, when you're typing all the time, you need to do some exercises.
Well,
And so
occupational therapy, right? That is occupational therapy is like using your fingers and learning after you injure them how to improve them.
exactly. And so in that case, we basically focus on our nose, and we worked with our clinicians and the charity together, and we then got like a small grant where we did a feasibility study, and we deployed the devices, the technology which was developed in labs, which Emanuela Magioni is leading, and we basically gave it to participants in London and Norwich over a 6 months period. That means you have that kind of new device at home with your app. You can do your training every day. That's the kind of recommended. What we wanted to understand is if people will engage with it and how they're engaging with it. Because bringing a new technology in your home, you need to see how it's adopted, because it's easy to,
I
well, I say
totally
easy to,
I used to
to
say
develop.
that I used to say that like with virtual reality, the hardest thing is to get from here right in front of you to on your face. And it's like you'd be like, I'm gonna do that. And then it was like, then you're like, do I do it? Mm, yeah. So it's to say it's like to yes, you have it, your intentions are great. I'm gonna work on
Yeah,
this, but are you gonna actually do it? Entirely different.
exactly. Absolutely. It's the adoption, because I mean, it's easy to develop technology. I mean, under quotation mark, because it's obviously hard, but still it's easy. But then the adoption is the biggest problem, because if you really want to make an impact on people's life, you need to make sure that it integrates with their routines. And it's amazing how hard it is to spend 10 minutes of your day split in two 5 minute blocks to focus on your nose. It's so difficult to find 5 minutes which is like,
But that's like meditation. I mean, I've done it that I've learned all the like little things of like you have to attach it to something else. You have to whatever, like it has to become routine. And how often do you do it? And I loved learning about this and that the process of doing it and the actual studying of it. And it's sort of that reminder. It like learning about your smell technology in the test reminded me of that same thing of like, oh my gosh, I have like I can feel things, with haptics. It's like, oh wait, you can test smell. Like this is amazing, as opposed to having it be very, like undefinable, which it seems like it is, but you've been able to create sort of frameworks.
can I just add one thing? Because you
Yeah.
just said something really interesting, which I think resonates a lot with the Smell Care project, because there were people in our sample of the feasibility study who had a smell disorder, right? So they had an impairment of the sense of smell and they tried to regain it. So there's a clear motivation why I want to actually do it, right? It's like if you have broken your leg or your arm, you will do your physiotherapy because you hope to get better. And I think that was very strong. But then we had another group which they didn't have any smell disorders. So in the kind of assessments, they had normal kind of sense of smell. And there the motivation is not that intrinsic. So how do you kind of get people to still do it? Because especially we had a focus on elderly over 65, because as our eyes and hearing and physical motor skills are reducing, all our sense of smell and taste also reduce. But you can counteract, you can help counteract that decline by engaging with it,
Yeah.
right?
Not just the puzzles and not just the
No,
whatever,
no.
that you also have to do the smell certain things. So my simplified, because I said that I
Yeah.
like to simplify was I tend to say, because my focus is much more branding and brand strategy, is I tend to do like so what and who cares. And then the who cares is like who's going to care enough about your technology to buy it, to try it, whatever. And then the so what is just like it improves this. And it's like it's 100 times faster. And so like you got to the like who's going to care? Somebody who wants to improve their smell or somebody who wants to improve their sort of mental capabilities or their I loved that kind of the insight you had on it's not just it's the puzzles that are going to improve your mental capabilities, but it's also smelling new things or testing new things or the new things can be through your nose, not just through your eyes or
It goes back to where we started, really. The kind of like we take it for granted, but what if you are actually putting the attention to it? It's like because we are not aware of the importance of it, we often just like when we lose it, we suddenly become aware. It's like when, and it's all about this kind of like, yes, it's kind of under this label of prevention, but we know we're all bad in doing preventive things because it's like till we have the problem, we are the exception in the world, we never get affected. But it's like, how can we make it such an integral part of our everyday life? And even if it's not the technology, even like if you just go and actively smell something, it's already helping. And I think that kind of awareness, that's kind of like where the Smell Care project set the foundation and where we talked about the smell care culture, which we want to kind of establish. And we started a collaboration with Japan because there is a very different culture when it comes to smell from ceremonies or how it is embedded in your environment. And so we are currently kind of looking into that. So just from a UK and Japan perspective, to really kind of like make it a culture. Because if it's a culture of care for your nose and your sense of smell, that's where I think then technology can come in as well easier later.
well, you get a little, I mean, there's hints to it, right? When you think about the perfume or candles or whatever, and then you're like, oh, you have to create the environment or whatever, but it's not, and it's like that self-care very broadly is associated, but maybe it's some deeper thing that scientifically we didn't understand the reason for it, but you have the the reason and the research, of why that needs to be more proactive in our approaches. It's fascinating. I do want to touch on ethics for a little bit, but I don't want to end on it.
Sure.
It's because I feel like that also was really interesting that you in the I don't know if it was the book specifically that called it out, was saying like there needs to be sort of rules around the creating of these different senses, which seemed very like robotics, like the rules of robotics kind of reminded me.
We took inspiration from Asimov. We did acknowledge it in our three laws of multisensory experiences. But you can imagine that Carlos Velasco and I, we were like, okay, we need to close the book with with an outlook which can also be stimulate reflection, discussion, and controversy. Because I mean, we are obviously excited about this space. I mean, we work on it for such a long time, but there is always the things you can do with it which are not for good. And so we closed the book on that kind of reflection on the three laws of multisensory experiences inspired by Asimov's laws of robotics, and give some examples where we try to illustrate that there isn't a black and white answer, because it's not just good or bad. In certain situation, certain multisensory experience design decisions are good because they are made for certain reasons, but in the same decision might not work so well. Maybe they're different cultural setting because there are different values we need to consider. So we play with that kind of examples so that the reader also can think a bit more carefully how they would use it and why certain kind of frameworks and concepts need to be careful considered when we start really kind of intentionally creating those multisensory experiences, and not just as the world is immersed in these multisensory experiences.
I talked about in my class, obviously not studying it to the degree that you did, but in like VR, where there's the distance that you have between you and other players, that in certain cultures, it actually might be too close and others too far. And I had that when I've done like global marketing, and it's like, wait a second, Spanish, when you translate English to Spanish, it's much longer. That there's so many different factors that people, they think it's so simple, these decisions, but it's not. And I feel like you give some of the I feel like I want to use other like sensory words like texture, and I'm like, no, that's touch. Like, but you give some structure to that. So what's the next? Are you going to work on taste? That's the one for me. I mean, but taste is a really difficult one, or proprioception, or like some of what's the next thing you think you'll look
You are
into?
not wrong. Taste is definitely on the
Yeah.
menu.
I mean,
Um,
I'm a foodie, and so it's sort of that's why. But that one's so hard. That one's so hard. Like,
Absolutely. I think it's a final frontier. So I always say the chemical senses, so chemosensory experiences are the ones which will really drive the research moving forwards. And I think smell and taste are super interesting. I always say, well, smell, we spend a lot of time trying to build the hardware, building the technology, and still it's very hard because there is no basic smells we can refer to, like in basic tastes, where we have five basic tastes, which the community kind of agrees on. But the stimulation is very hard because it's the only of the human senses where you have to stimulate inside the body unless you find the brain stimulation. But I'm believing in chemical stimulation to really capture the full range of the experiences and the quality which come with our sense of taste. And so you have on one hand smell where the space is humongous. We work, especially within Hynt Labs, we work very hard in that direction to kind of map out that space, both from the hardware and the software side. But taste is something where we need to find a way to stimulate it in a way that it's not destroying the experience, because you don't want
putting
a
in
tube in your mouth or
right,
clips on
an
around
electric thing
electrodes.
in your mouth. Like that's just sort of. I think that that's I came up with a pretend technology years ago that ended up actually sort of being not separate and apart. People can have similar ideas from different parts of the world. And I was just like, how do you convince somebody, let alone you're trying to convince somebody to do something, to smell something in their home? Like, now put this electronic device in your mouth. Like, ah!
Yeah.
But
So
it
yeah. That's where I think there will be a lot of research in that area. But then again, the solution we have found so far is using levitation, using sound waves to levitate food, because it's like, an astronaut, you float food in front of you, and then the only thing you need to do is stick out your tongue, and then that's our levitation device. So we built tasty floats and then an extension of it for multisensory integration, LeviSense. So that was our solution for the stimulation device. And what we are working on right now is, on the other hand, also much more on how do we talk about it. So it's now over 10 years that I published the first paper on taste, which was about a framework, a design framework for taste, where I try to capture how people verbalize their experiences. And we found different dimensions. And we are continuing on that work now to really try to build that kind of language around taste, because I think you can have hardware, but you need the kind of data and the feed the software. And I think that is an exciting time. So how do we kind of unlock this full potential of the chemical senses? I think especially in the wider space of HCI and whatever applications we can imagine. Yeah, I think that will keep me busy and the
just a little
team.
bit, just so that, no, thank you so much. I knew that uh, I would feel like we just got started. I have like all these other notes and things that what your work is fascinating. Your work is absolutely
Thank you.
fascinating. And so people, they can pick up your book, they can go to your, like, go to your website, go to LinkedIn. Is that probably
Yeah, yeah,
the best way to do it? That's
absolutely. I mean, if we just published Colors and I, the second edition of the book, Multisensory Experiences, where the senses meet technology, we expanded it. There are more examples in there. There is a whole reflection. And also there's a tool as part of it, cards, the X Sense design cards. So you can create your own multisensory experiences. They're freely downloadable, so you can play with it. But yeah, otherwise, please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to always talk about the senses.
amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Samantha.